You're watching Al Jazeera English. It's just gone 10:25 GMT. That's 1 here in Doha. You have been watching Dr. Ralph Wilde, the senior counsel and advocate for the League of Arab States. He spoke shortly after Abdul Hakim El Rafi, the chargé d'affaires and permanent mission of the League of Arab States in Brussels. A very detailed legal setting out of exactly what the occupation means for Palestinians in occupied Gaza and the West Bank, and what the legal obligations are for Israel as an occupying state. It has been a morning of speeches and presentations, 2 weeks, over 8 days, of over 50 countries and 3 human rights organisations who have been presenting their cases to the International Court of Justice in The Hague. Today we heard from the Ambassador of Turkey, the Solicitor General of Zambia, and later on we will hear from the Organisation of Islamic Cooperation. Analyst Marwan Bishara to discuss this further. He was sitting in and listening to what was being said by Dr. Wilde. We were listening intently, but our ears pricked up on one particular statement, which was when Dr. Wilde talked about how certain countries want us to think the law is in a particular party's favour. He said the law as you like it should not be determined by the law as it is. A very direct and comprehensive, you might say, sit up and take note, don't be taken in by what's being said. The law's written down here and you've got to, all 15 judges have got to take note of it.
I thought he took aim at the United States and the United Kingdom, rather cleverly, I should say, basically telling them that there is the international law and there is your attempt at expropriating international law for your own ends. You can do that, but don't call it international law. That wouldn't be international law. And trying to treat Israel as sui generis, as a unique issue in terms of its occupation of Palestine is not acceptable. But I thought in general that this was the best argumented, most comprehensive argument thus far that we've heard.
He unpicked it very cleverly, didn't he?
I think he did, and I think there are 2 reasons why I'm saying that. One, it's because he put the occupation of the Palestinian territories after 1967 in its historic context. This is the best possible argument against the United States and the United Kingdom that say, let's leave it to the parties to resolve the dispute. And this could be by nature temporary, even if it's more than 5 decades. What Dr. Wilde has said is that there's a pattern, there's a process, and there is context. And the context is that Israel has been doing this not since 1967, it's been doing this since 1947. And that the same thing, basically, that it did in the Galilee, in the Triangle, and the Negev area within Israel against the Palestinians after 1948, it's doing now to the Palestinians in the occupied territories that are occupied after 1967. Hence, there's a pattern. Hence, what Israel is doing in the occupied territories is not random and it's not incidental. It is by design, and it is meant as an annexation. Hence the building of the settlements and the proliferation and expansion of those settlements. The second point that I thought has been very, very clear, and let's remind ourselves, this is a lawyer that speaks for the Arab League. I mean, the Arab League as an organization in reality has been kind of useless. But here, in terms of representing a consensus against a settler colonial entity in an Arab region, I think it's key. And hence the 2 points that he made that I thought summarized the entire thing was saying, one, that the Israel illegal use of force in the occupied territories that is meant to protect its settlement enterprise and annexation is a form of aggression. It is unlawful. Second, by doing that, it is denying the Palestinians the right for self-determination on whatever pretext, including the pretext of self-defense, that he took a while in explaining why this is not acceptable according to international law.
One of the issues that we've spoken to many contributors who've been on Al Jazeera over the past 4 months, we're media folk, we speak to analysts, we speak to politicians. How important are proceedings like this for the public who are watching Al Jazeera now and have been watching this court presentation, that they listen to the facts and the historical context for themselves and make their own decisions? Because we're seeing these global protests from people around the world who have got one opinion or the other. But when you hear the facts and they're put in context and what is legal and what is illegal, all right, Mr. Wilde is speaking on behalf of the League of Arab States, but Israel has its supporters in that court too, and they will speak as well. How important is it to listen to what these people are saying?
It's tremendously important, and not just to the Arab League legal advisor here, but also to what the United States said and the UK, because this is a very important issue that's been with us for a century now, and that has become an inflaming point for an entire region and a threat to world peace and security. Now, of course, in the world of global media, as you know very well, Suhail, since you are a seasoned journalist, we are more attached to infotainment nowadays than we are to something that almost resembles a lecture at a university, in this case, the University of London. So this might be difficult to follow for people who are not expert in the issue. But I would suggest the following, at least, that this needs to be saved, archived, and taught at the universities. That this should be used by every documentarian, by every journalist, as a background, important, factual, legal argument about this issue that we call Israeli occupation of Palestine. It is so well argued, it is so factual, and it speaks to the spirit of the law. Now, why is this important, speaking to the letter and the spirit of the law? Because in conflict like the Arab-Israeli conflict, in situations of aggression, apartheid, and colonialism, you have one of two solutions. Either resistance, as the Chinese argued, could be resistance by force or popular resistance, and that could take years, decades, and months. In the case of Algeria and South Africa, that we also heard from in the first day, this took millions of casualties. In the case of Algeria, we speak about almost 1 million deaths in liberating Algeria from the French settler colonials. The other way is the international community defending international law. That's the other possibility for how we can end situations as in Israel's occupation and apartheid in Palestine. So either it has to be local, regional resistance that could lead to bloodshed, major bloodshed, as we see in Gaza today, or it could be the international community coming together, not led by hypocrites and double standards, but by responsible grown-ups who can see that after 75 years of dispossession, aggression, and occupation, that the two parties don't have a dispute, that, as we've heard from Dr. Wilde, that there is one party that has been aggressing another party for 75 years through the use of force and oppression.
This actual proceeding was already, you might say, on the timetable. Had October the 7th not happened, Marwan, would this have got the publicity? Would it have got over 50 countries and 3 human rights organisations involved in proceedings? Because, dare I say it, unfortunately, it's coincidental that this particular case was already going to be heard anyway, regardless of what happened on October the 7th.
You know, one of the reasons, one of the sad and unfortunate reasons for the justification for the October 7 attack was those Palestinians in Gaza, of the likes of Hamas, were saying, we have been forgotten, we have been marginalized, we have been neglected, under occupation, under siege, under oppression for decades now. And not only that the world has forgotten us, the Arabs have forgotten us. Not only the Arabs have forgotten us, the Arabs, or a good number of them, good number of their regimes, have stabbed us in the back by normalizing relations with Israel at our expense. So you can imagine that Gaza has revolutionized, basically have, it's like a little hand grenade thrown in international law and international community, saying, pay attention here. You cannot continue to ignore this issue. And who was the first leader who responded to this, what I would call a gruesome attack against Israel on October 7, but also the subsequent many October 7s that happened against Gaza? It was President Biden. President Biden, that was basically complicit throughout his political career, meaning 50 years, with Zionism and with Israeli aggression and occupation. Complicit. After October 7, he said, 3 weeks later, in October 27, he said, basically telling the Israelis, we cannot go back to the status quo ante. We cannot go back to the pre-war status quo. We must now readdress and we must try to resolve this issue. We can't ignore it anymore. So if the American president start paying attention, right? If America, the UK, and everyone start paying attention, and they're coming to testify here, it goes a long way to show you that suddenly, unfortunately, after the death of tens of thousands of Palestinians over the past 4 or 5 months, that the world's starting to pay attention. But I tell you, Sohail, and I tell our viewers around the world, pay attention. Because in these dark times, the conspirators are not letting go. And those who wish the Palestinians ill and do not seek justice in the Middle East are arguing against the international law making itself evident in the question of Israel-Palestine.
And it does becoming more and more evident, certainly in those public demonstrations that we're seeing globally as well. People are not so much not believing, but they're just losing trust in their lawmakers, the people that they vote for. And we're seeing that. It'd be interesting to see, with so many major elections coming up in 2024, it'd be interesting to see how much this plays into that dialogue. What I did want to go back, and something you touched on, was, the countries that have presented their cases here at the ICJ. Over the 2 weeks, we saw South Africa, Algeria, Saudi Arabia. Just want to bring those in, along with Ireland. We talked about South Africa's apartheid. We know about Algeria's colonialism passed by the French. I wanted to bring in the role of Saudi Arabia because, as you just said, there's been a political hand grenade bomb thrown into the Middle East. Say, wake up, Arab countries, you haven't supported us, you stabbed us in the back. Saudi Arabia's presentation was incredibly strong, and it sort of made me think about the conversations before October the 7th. Was Saudi Arabia going to recognise Israel? What was Saudi Arabia's position? Various Arab countries were and for against what Saudi Arabia would do. Saudi Arabia takes a step, all the other Arab Muslim countries follow. How do you position Saudi Arabia in all of this now? Because they've remained a little bit quiet, but very vocal here.
Well, there is, in terms of analysis, there is the optimistic analysis and there is the pessimistic analysis. Let's start with the pessimistic analysis. The pessimistic analysis, the bad news, is that a good number of Arab regimes and Western regimes are hoping for this war to end with the defeat of Hamas, the containment of Gaza, pacification of Gaza, total destruction of Gaza, in order to go back to the Abraham Accords and normalizations of relations between a good number of new Arab countries with Israel. That's what they're hoping. And all of them are praying that Israel finishes the job already. That's why Americans and Brits and others are frustrated with the Israeli government. Not because it's killing people in Gaza. It's not because it's not finishing the job in a bit more civil way, right? Maybe perhaps 5,000, 10,000, 15, 20,000 dead, but not 30+ thousand, not 100,000 casualties, right? So clearly the Americans and others would wish this to end